Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring the most pressing issues across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mok-yeon. South Korean President Jae Myung has opened a month of high-stakes summit diplomacy. It began today in Seoul with Vietnam's top political leader, Communist Party General Secretary To Lam, the first Vietnamese head of state visiting in 11 years. The two leaders pledged to deepen their comprehensive strategic partnership, aiming for $150 billion in trade by 2030 and boosting cooperation in energy, technology, and security sectors. Now, later this month, President Lee will also meet U.S. President Donald Trump to discuss modernizing the alliance, tariff negotiations, and also defense cost sharing. A Korea-Japan summit is also under discussion, with speculation it could happen first, potentially shaping talks with Washington. So for an overall discussion on how the array of talks could shape Seoul's regional strategy, we're joined by Evans Revere, former Acting Assistant Secretary of State of the U.S. and non-resident senior fellow in the Foreign Policy Program at Brookings. A big welcome.
Great to be with you.
And also joining us is Hana Kim, Associate Professor at Seogang University's GSIS. Good to see you, Professor.
Thanks for having me again.
Right, so let's begin our discussion right away. To start with the big picture first. So today in Seoul, President Jae Myung met with Vietnam's top political leader, Communist Party General Secretary To Lam. Mr. Revere, so with this summit kicking off a month of intensive diplomacy for South Korea, also including talks with the U.S. and also Japan, what do you see as the top priorities of the Lee administration's diplomatic strategy?
Well, you're exactly right. This is going to be a pretty intensive period of South Korean diplomacy, and it'd be very interesting to see how it all plays out. From my perspective, I see four central priorities for the Republic of Korea under the new leadership in Seoul these days. I think the first priority, predictably, is managing relations with the Republic of Korea's only treaty ally, the United States. I think the goal, the diplomatic goal for the ROK, goes beyond what it normally would be for a U.S.-ROK summit. In other words, it goes beyond just maintaining the traditional strength and solidarity in the U.S.-ROK alliance. And I say that because for the first time in the history of this alliance, the United States is led by a president, Donald Trump, who does not necessarily believe in alliances in the conventional way. He has attempted to treat longtime allies as adversaries. He has claimed that America's allies are taking advantage of the United States, and he has sought to push allies, including the Republic of Korea, to take on greater security military burden sharing. The Trump presidency has called into question the U.S. commitments to its allies and partners in Europe and in Asia. And I think many of the longtime assumptions that America's allies once had about the reliability of the United States, those assumptions have been weakened and in some cases have evaporated. Trump has launched tariff wars, and as I said, he's made enormous demands for increased burden sharing, and he is now proposing, I believe, fundamental changes in the nature of the U.S.-ROK alliance. So for all those reasons, the U.S. is the #1 diplomatic priority for the Republic of Korea, as it should be. The second priority, of course, is North Korea, which poses an existential threat to South Korea. The ROK has ambitious plans for re-engaging with North Korea. It's not at all clear that the DPRK shares South Korea's interest in re-engagement, but we'll see. The third top priority is how to deal with China and Russia. The new South Korean government continues to believe, against considerable evidence in my view, that Beijing and Moscow are prepared to be helpful in dealing with North Korea. In fact, China has drawn closer to Russia and to North Korea, and of course Russia is giving North Korea some real-world military experience, combat experience in the war against Ukraine, and is providing important military and technical assistance to the DPRK, thereby strengthening North Korea's ability to do serious damage to South Korea. And then the fourth priority for Seoul, I think, is stronger relations with Japan, Vietnam, and other regional powers and partners who, like the Republic of Korea, live in the shadow of a more aggressive and expansionist China, and who are trying to cope with a U.S. that seems to have lost its bearings, its traditional bearings, and its appetite for leadership. So those are the four top priorities. There are other priorities, but those are the first four that leap to mind.
Right. So managing its relations with South Korea's allies, of course, and also North Korea, China, and Russia would be very, very important for the nation. Now, let's go back to the latest summit with the Vietnamese leader. It really carries a lot of significance, of course, coming from, it's the first top leader of Vietnam coming to Korea in 11 years. And it's also the first head of state that comes to the Lee administration. Professor Kim, how do you see the significance of this?
I think it's quite significant. And I think President Lee also mentioned that this is significant. And we can see that it is for many different strategic, economic, and symbolic reasons. Economically, as of now, Vietnam serves as a key manufacturing and export hub with low labor costs, multiple free trade agreements, and many large Korean investors running their largest overseas operations there, including Samsung. So by hosting Tolam so early on, Lee might be signaling to Korean conglomerates or chaebols, including Samsung, LG, and SK, and others, that his administration is working to protect and expand their foothold in Vietnam. It can also open the door for new cooperation in semiconductors, green energy, and supply chain diversification away from China. And because of the US tariffs on both South Korea and Vietnam, this visit can really mitigate some of these impacts, or the impacts of the tariffs, and bolster semiconductor and electronic supply chains. Strategically, also, Vietnam has become a strategic outpost for countries seeking to balance relations between the United States and China. Now, in many ways, Vietnam kind of sits at the crossroads of Southeast Asia and the South China Sea. So because of this, it plays a really important role. And in fact, Vietnam can be viewed as a trusted Asian partner that can work in regional security dialogues, maritime issues, and multilateral forums like APEC. And also, just the relationship between South Korea and Vietnam, we've seen that the relationship between the two countries was upgraded to a comprehensive strategic partnership in 2022, putting Vietnam in Korea's top tier bilateral relationships. So because of these, stronger ties will bolster South Korea's aims to expand diplomatic and economic influence. In many ways, inviting Vietnam as the first state guest in this way might be a strategic choice. And by making Vietnam's top leader the first state guest, it's really symbolic because it's a deliberate signal to China and to the United States that Seoul or South Korea is really cultivating its own key relationships that don't focus necessarily on big powers, but maybe possibly on other countries and other regional alliances.
Right. So it definitely seems to be a very good opportunity for both countries. Now, when we look at the results of the latest meeting that was held today, the two sides actually adopted a joint statement to deepen this, what Professor Kim has mentioned, Korea-Vietnam Comprehensive Strategic Partnership with future-oriented cooperation, of course. And they also set a goal to expand bilateral trade to $150 billion by 2030, and also signed over 10 MOUs on covering various industries. So, Professor Kim, how could this partnership bolster Korea's global middle power diplomacy strategy?
And so in many ways, I think the relationship or the partnership between the two countries is still developing. And I think this is just one of the first steps towards that. But because of this first step is actually showing that it really fits squarely into Korea's global middle power diplomacy playbook, because it's showing that South Korea is operating not just as a passive player in major power dynamics, but also as an active one of regional and sectoral cooperation. Now, first, the fact that South Korea is trying to strengthen its ties with Vietnam, a country that's considered to be Asia's rising economy and a key South China Sea actor, can help Korea avoid overdependence on some of the larger countries, such as the United States or China. And because Vietnam is a leading ASEAN member with a lot of political clout in Southeast Asia, this can help in terms of the partnership as well, because South Korea can gain greater access and influence within ASEAN, and also it can use it as a platform to promote South Korea's values and policy priorities on issues like economic development, sustainable growth, and regional security. And as you mentioned, by setting the goal to expand bilateral trade between the two countries by 150 billion US dollars by 2030, in many ways, South Korea might be positioning itself as a regional economic hub, linking advanced industrial supply chains with fast-growing emerging markets. But also, this partnership just in general reinforces Korea's role as a middle power connector. The partnership is working hard to not just develop in terms of its economic and political ways, but culturally as well, because South Korea continues to really, show itself as a global player, especially in terms of soft power. And also, this partnership exemplifies strategic signaling in the Indo-Pacific. Vietnam, it has a very strategic location, and there are shared concerns between the two countries about supply chain resilience, maritime security, and technological sovereignty. And so as a result, these two countries really need each other. And so they're taking the first steps to really do this. But if South Korea sustains this momentum, then the Korea-Vietnam partnership really could serve as a flagship example of middle power diplomacy and reinforce Korea's global middle power diplomacy strategy if it's successful.
Wow. So we hope there would be a lot to look forward to between the two countries following the latest visit. Now, let's turn a little bit to the summit with America that's going to be held in a couple of days. Now, at the end of this month, a meeting with U.S. President Donald Trump is also scheduled for President Lee Jae-myung. And the key agenda item is modernizing the Korea-U.S. alliance. And it covers a broad scope, including adjustments to the role of the U.S. FK2. Mr. Revere, what is this core of this alliance modernization, and what kind of diplomatic approach then South Korea could take in preparation for this?
Well, as various U.S. officials, including General Brunson, have been talking about these issues over the last several days, the scope of the meaning of this term of alliance modernization has become pretty clear. I think at a minimum, it includes an expansion of the idea of the U.S. ROK alliance's concept of threats to include threats off the Korean Peninsula, elsewhere in the region, including perhaps Taiwan or China-related contingencies. I think it also includes allowing Korea-based U.S. forces to be used elsewhere in the region to deal with other contingencies that don't necessarily relate to the North Korean threat, which will remain the central mission of those forces on the Korean Peninsula. I think the term also includes the possible adjustment of the level of U.S. forces in Korea, the numbers of forces on the Korean Peninsula. Perhaps to allow the transfer of some U.S. forces to duties elsewhere, either elsewhere in the Asia Pacific or to other places, all the while, as General Brunson has stated, keeping the key capabilities that are necessary to defend the Republic of Korea in place on the Korean Peninsula. I think the U.S. definition of modernization of the alliance also includes a desire to see the Republic of Korea play an even greater role in its own defense, including by accelerating its acquisition of those capabilities that have already been defined as necessary to enable eventual transition of operational control of ROK forces, wartime operational control, to be transferred to the ROK. So the ROK at the summit is going to be faced with some very difficult choices, things that I suspect the current leadership in Seoul is not enthusiastic about doing. And I think it's going to be imperative for President Lee and his team to make very clear to the United States what is possible, but also what is not possible, and to seek a middle ground, if you will, between the ROK and the United States in terms of this path to a more modern, sophisticated, capable, and expanded alliance.
So a lot of sensitive issues are expected on the
Indeed.
talks. But let's stay a little bit with the defense cost issue, Mr. Revere. So media outlets have been reporting that the Trump administration is considering to ask Korea to raise its defense spending to 3.8% of GDP and to increase its share of defense cost contributions. Do you think such demands would realistically be acceptable?
Well, we should keep in mind that the United States has already made even greater demands of America's NATO allies, and in some cases gotten some progress, although not exactly what Donald Trump might have wished for. I suspect that this summit, there's going to be, or in advance of this summit, I think it's already happening, there's going to be a lot of pressure applied on the Republic of Korea to boost its defense spending and to review its burden-sharing commitments with an eye towards increasing them. I personally, and a lot of experts I know, don't support the idea of imposing an artificial number or artificial percentage on defense spending for any country, including the United States. Ideally, your level of defense spending should depend on the nature of the threat and what sort of capabilities you are trying to develop to deal with that threat. And that is, I think, the argument that the Republic of Korea should make to the United States, that Korea knows best what it has, what it needs, and what the threat is, and is prepared to have a serious discussion with the United States about what level of spending is appropriate. But once again, I think at the end of the day, this is a sovereign decision for the Republic of Korea, and I hope the United States will respect South Korea's sovereign decision and its willingness to do whatever is necessary and whatever it deems appropriate to defend itself.
Now, tariff talks will also be, of course, on the agenda for discussions between the two leaders, and they're expected to discuss the details of this $350 billion investment fund South Korea will do for the U.S. Professor Kim, what kind of strategic approach would you think would be necessary for Korea to gain a little bit of an advantage in these talks?
I think Korea needs to try to apply many different approaches because it's really hard to gauge how the Trump administration is going to be reacting. So one of the options might be that Korea may try to leverage its critical role in supply chain. So during the summit, Korea should really try to focus on highlighting its critical role, especially in global semiconductor, automotive, pharmaceutical, and technology supply chains. Korea should also try to emphasize that tariff relief and investment support are mutually beneficial, and that protecting and strengthening integrated supply chains are critical to U.S. industries as well as national security. Now, how much of that will be taken into consideration is a different story, but I think it would help if Korea continues to send this message. And also, Korea needs to show that it's a stable, innovative investment destination and that one that can partner with advanced infrastructure and a skilled workforce. So in that way, it should show that Korea's development goals align with US priorities such as green technology, digital transformation, and semiconductor capacity expansion. And that would underscore how the $350 billion fund can really accelerate shared objectives. And in addition to all of this, Korea should try to utilize the summit diplomacy as much as possible in terms of engaging in high-level diplomatic dialogue. In many ways, the summit is an opportunity that can be used to build trust and personal rapport between leaders that would essentially smoothen negotiations. And that, I think, is a method that Trump does tend to appreciate a little bit more. So during the summit, negotiations can be framed as a part of a broader US-Korea strategic partnership. And that would, I think, help. So the summit and in general should be framed not just as an economic form of support, but also one that can function as a catalyst for a long-term, more mutually beneficial partnership.
Right, so a two-track approach covering diplomacy and economy would be definitely helpful. Now, let's also touch upon Korea-Japan relations before we leave our discussion. So Japanese media outlets report that a summit is being coordinated for the 23rd, even though the presidential office has yet to confirm it. So, Mr. Revere, if the Korea-Japan summit were held before the Korea-U.S. summit. What would be its symbolism and diplomatic message?
Well, the ROK and Japan are natural partners. Both of them are U.S. allies, close and good U.S. allies. Both of them face immediate threats from North Korea. Both of them live in the shadow of an increasingly militarily capable China and Beijing's bullying behavior in the airspace and waters of the region. I think an early and successful ROK-Japan summit would send a very strong and positive signal that I think would be welcomed by Washington, that Seoul and Tokyo recognize the importance of tactical and strategic cooperation, and they recognize the importance of building on the progress that's already been made between Tokyo and Seoul in establishing a solid foundation for bilateral relations going forward. And so I think I don't see a problem with an early summit. As a matter of fact, since the United States has long advocated strong, close, cooperative ROK-Japan relations, and including, of course, trilateral relations with the United States, I think the United States would welcome the fact that the two countries are moving in the direction that the United States has long argued for.
Right, so it could even help boost trilateral cooperation between the three countries moving forward, right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. All right, but as for now, we will have to conclude our discussion here at this point. Thank you so much for your time and for your insights tonight, Professor Kim.
Thank you.
And Mr. Revere, we really appreciate it.
You are welcome.
And that'll be all from us on Within the Frame tonight. Be sure to tune in again next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Until then, stay informed and engaged.